Hey, party people. I see you all filtering back into the space. Hopefully, you took the time to chat with Brian a little bit. We're going to offer that again after this. But up next, and I want to give them ample time in the next 45 minutes of this session, from prototype to production, process and tools, we have Megan Torrance and Matt Kliewer, who are going to share with us during this next 45. And by all means, use the Q&A space and the chat to put up questions throughout. Megan, we didn't talk about it, but I'm sure you between you and Matt can field questions as you go, or if you want to save them to the end, I'm happy to jump back in and provide those. So you let me know.
Awesome. I think we'll probably be able to handle it, but if not, we will call Uncle.
All righty. I will be available. Have a great session. Talk to you soon.
All right. Well, as Mark and Brian have both said today, welcome, party people. It is always good to be back at the xAPI party, and so many good memories, lots of fun, lots of really great insight and information. So do me a favor on your emojis. Give me a thumbs up if this is your first ever xAPI party, and how about a heart if you have been to the xAPI party before. So thumbs up if this is your first ever, lots of first timers, and hearts. Okay, we got some repeat folks. I believe this is pretty darn close to about the 20th xAPI party that's ever been held. So we should probably count. That would be really interesting, and probably good fodder for Brian's presentation on the history of xAPI. So I also, I love the lead in that we got from Brian on the timeline and the history up until now, right? And a little bit of projection on what's to come from an industry and a standards perspective, because Matt and I today are going to take that the next layer up, but also a layer or two into you and what you need to be doing in order to move yourself along a timeline or a roadmap towards adoption. And we want to share some tools that have been helpful and useful to ourselves and to our clients and to folks in the xAPI cohort all these years, as they've moved from prototypes, which happen in production. And quite honestly, I cannot wait to see the projects that are going to be demoed later on today at the party, because there's so much awesomeness in that early stage prototype experience. But we want to share some tools that will help you move from prototype on forward from that. One of those tools, and I'm just going to put this out there, one of those tools is your network. One of those tools are the people that you can reach out and ask questions and get answers. And that network is both within the cohort, and that network is strong. If you have not signed up for cohort and you don't use that Slack community, you are missing out on 8,000 or more learning professionals doing xAPI. And if that sounds overwhelming, don't be. It's actually an incredibly orderly place. So there's lots going on there, but also reach out to each other on LinkedIn. So go ahead, and if you want to connect up with other folks in this space, go ahead and reach out in LinkedIn. And I strongly recommend that. That's my professional development tip for today. I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'll tee up Matt, and then we'll get right at it. So I am the CEO and founder at Torrance Learning. Matt and I, when we work together, we joke that my role is strategy, hype, connecting the dots, pulling people together, waving my hands, getting people excited about learning strategy, learning design, data design at xAPI. And Matt's job is generally then to actually make it happen. Matt, can you introduce yourself and your role at Torrance Learning?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Kliewer. Been at Torrance Learning for almost 12 years this summer. And I'm on the learning engineering team. And I do primarily development, so working a lot with xAPI and web development. So we've been using that for about as long as xAPI has been around. So
we could put you in Brian's presentation. That would have been hilarious. and Matt is part of a team of folks doing design, development, data strategy, and project management at Torrance Learning. So I love the opportunity to collaborate with him, but I also love the opportunity to get to know who's here. So one of the things that we often ask at the xAPI party is, where are you on your xAPI journey? And we make a simple poll here. Go ahead and just put the numbers of the items that you can relate to here in the chat. Where are you in your xAPI journey? Let's see what we've got. Okay, some 2s, some 3s, some 4s. Awesome, some A5. Hello, old friend. Right? Brian, I can't find chat. You can find the chat, right? So fantastic. And Jamie Washington is saying, so what Jamie's referring to there in the chat is Matt actually, right? So talk about an example of waving your hands and then seeing what happens. Matt put a door sensor, an Internet of Things sensor on the conference room door at our office. And every time the door would open or close, it would send an xAPI statement. And it was a fantastic opportunity to explore the power of data, as well as to generate a whole lot of data, a part of which was useless, right? And that in and of itself was a learning experience, and a learning experience that we shared with people. So when our sensor opened or closed the door, right, it sent an xAPI statement, and in the context for that statement was the temperature of the room, which was interesting, but also the altitude of the room, which on a good day, the altitude of your conference room does not change, right? So it was sending some just noise, right? And so part of the work that we're going to do after we generate a lot of data, right? Part of that work that we're going to do is to filter it out and figure out what data is actually useful. And see if we can hone the data that we send to that useful stuff. So lots of folks in here, and folks, what I want you to do is be aware of who else is on this journey with you in here at the party, and where are they, and where are you? And it's not a race, by the way. It's not a race. In fact, the folks who are out ahead on that journey have had a lot of hard bushwhacking to do. And apropos of the session right before, there's a lot of hard bushwhacking that it takes to be first on a journey like this. So what I want to do, and really the purpose of this session, is to help you get through some of that bushwhacking, right? If you don't know what bushwhacking is, I realize I'm just using a pretty, it's when you're out hiking, but you're hiking in a place that has no trail, right? So you're just going through the bush. Whacking your way through. Today, what I want to do is I want to talk about what a roadmap or a trail map to adoption might look like, and the strategies that each stage in that pathway imply as you go, because there's a whole lot of excitement around making that first connection, but there's a lot of things going on in that strategic move through. It's not just tinkering with a JavaScript, right? So really having that connection is important. And then I have a whole bunch of tools and processes and skills and mindset to share with you, and these are just teasers enough for you to say, oh, that's a place I ought to dig into. And we've got links and resources and stuff that Matt and our colleague Meg and I will be pasting into the chat as we go, that'll help you, right? What we want to do is give you just enough to make you dangerous and get you out there in this space. We're happy to help, but I want you to be self-sufficient to the extent that makes sense. And then Matt's going to wrap up with what I call the power tool. an xAPI Concepts Viewer. It's a free tool that Matt has developed to help people use xAPI. And if you've experienced the xAPI or the xAPI profile flattener that Matt created, this is the next evolution and a more of that. So that demo will be, it's a reason to listen to me for 30 minutes because then you get to hear from Matt on the Concepts Viewer. So let's start with what a roadmap might look like. Matt and I spent some time last year really looking at what we were seeing, people coming out of the cohort and in our client base as they get ready to adopt it and they start adopting xAPI, right? So there's prototypes that I see. Prototypes are happening here at cohort. Right? In most cases, these are prototypes. Pilots are when we start to get like real users in the organization, but maybe with stuff that we're not. It's not fully fledged, right? It's just like, hey, let's try a thing, and everybody knows that we're just trying a thing, right? First production is like your first real deal, actually going to be released beyond a pilot audience. And after that generally becomes a bumpy phase of multiple projects where you have, particularly if you have a larger organization, you have some groups in your L&D team that are zooming ahead and some groups that are still back at pilot stage or prototype stage, and you got multiple things going on. And it's about the time, if you haven't already, when you get to multiple projects, that you're like, oh, we should get ourselves organized as a company. Right. And then there's full scale operation where everything's xAPI. Think about where we are right now with SCORM is full scale operation, right? Most organizations are full scale SCORM. And so we're not there yet with xAPI and CMI5 in general in large organizations today. And so Matt and I made this, we called it a graphic designer, made it look pretty. And then I realized that there's actually something that happens before you get to prototype stage. Now, if you're here in this room, it's entirely possible you're at prototype or beyond, right? But before prototype, before you get here, it's not that there's nothing. In some cases, people just don't know. In some cases, people are resistant. And if you're here, you're in the curious space, right? So that's, as we look at, it's not quite a maturity model, but I think about this as a roadmap to xAPI and analytics maturity, right? The full-blown roadmap, right, really looks across on this vertical axis here on the left, looks across some of the underlying components and processes that need to exist in an organization at each step, right? And so early on, I want you to take a look at the prototype stage, especially those of you who said that you are in the 2 or maybe the 3 stage of implementing xAPI, right? Take a look at your prototype stage and see if that resonates with you, right? You're here, you're just getting your feet wet. You want to get somebody to say, yeah, hey, that's a good idea. Let's keep exploring that. You may be one of the very few people in your learning and development organization who know what xAPI is, really, right? Beyond the I can spell it space. You don't have a lot of budget, so you're going to use your existing tools. And I will tell you, the day you get a piece of data to show, so those of you who've gotten to stage 3 or beyond, right? The day you first see data arrive in a learning record store is a day you probably remember in your career. Maybe I'm a little bit on the wonky geeky side, but like I remember that, and it was pretty darn exciting. Matt and I are working with a team of college students, and they all took pictures of themselves with their first like it's alive moment, and they were so excited, right? And so as you move on, right, through, and then from a relationship perspective, right, it might be a solo project. It's entirely possible, right? Over the years, as we've talked to folks at cohort, there are lots of people in their organization who don't even know that they're doing cohort. You're doing it on the side, you're peeking in, you're coming to the party, right? And so it's not until you move further to the other stage that each of these things starts to advance, right? And to get a little bit on the social and innovation development, all my MBA friends, you can come out of the closet now here, right? I'm looking at applying this roadmap, not just to the maturity of an organization, right? So this is all about what's happening in an organization, but to be thinking about your own maturity and roadmap on your xAPI path as a professional, right? Here you're spending time as a professional and you're developing your skills, but also the industry. And that was really Brian's presentation in the last hour. And by the way, if you just joined us and you missed the first hour, it's a really great session to go and review because it puts so many things into context, right? When I think about the industry evolution, we've got the evolution of the specification itself. We have the evolution of vendors. So Brian was saying, right, go talk to your vendors and say, do you do xAPI? Do you do CMI5, right? And then when they say, yes, we do, say, can you show me, right? And show me how, right? Really dig in, right? And then the education system, and Matt and I were talking about this as we were developing this session. When I'm talking about the education system, I'm not talking about the learning management system. I'm talking about higher ed and the ways in which people learn to do this job. That also has to adopt this as a way of working, and that has to be taught in those formal and informal learning spaces as we look toward a maturity of the organization. And like any kind of maturity, if you have kids, you're like, yeah, got it, right? It's not a straight line. In fact, it's never even within a model a straight line. So you may go forward and back, but we put this model up in front of one of our clients, and he instantly said, yes, this makes perfect sense, and then drew a line that looked like this, right? Where different pieces of what they were working on fell in different columns, and that's absolutely appropriate, right? So don't feel like either the model's wrong or you're wrong if your maturity and your phase on this roadmap doesn't line right up. That's totally cool. All right, so we have this roadmap to adoption, and along the way, there's some strategy around how you're using this and how you're moving forward in this space, right? Because at each step, right, you're doing whatever it is. You're making the project. In the next hour, you're going to see a RISE project, right, that got made by one of the cohort teams. You've got, and a couple hours after that, right, or actually in the next ones, you've got a project in which xAPI was used in a leadership training context. You've got a project in which xAPI was used in a software simulation, right? So each of those that's the doing the thing, the software, the leadership, right? Those you're teaching the thing, but you're also doing double duty, right? So you're also building your own skills, confidence, credibility to move your organization and yourself to the next stage in that maturity, right? And so there's double duty happening at any one of these stages, right? From a strategic perspective, moving left to right, early on, you're experimenting, you're playing, you're fiddling around with what could be done, you're seeing what's possible. It's very exciting and fun, and maybe not as much fun as the stages to come, right? As things get more formal and the decisions you make really matter. Right? When you're in that first production project, you are really all moving into a space where you're proving the case. And the further you get to the right here, it becomes business as usual, right? Think about the last time in your organization you actually talked about SCORM, or you actually had to say that e-learning, it's got to be SCORM compliant, right? We don't talk about it anymore because we don't have to. And that's when Brian talked about the durability, right? And the request for a durable spec, right? That's durability to me, right? So we'll get there a bit to business as usual, right? Early on, including in the ignorance, resistance, and curiosity stage, right? Our existing tools work. And to a certain extent, our existing tools will support depending on the nature of your pilot, right? Start supporting some of your early work in this space. Ultimately, tools and modalities that you're using are going to be interoperable. At Torrance Learning, if it doesn't do xAPI, we don't use it. Right? It doesn't make sense. Well, there's a couple exceptions, right? But it just doesn't make sense, right? So that for us is how we think about full-scale operation. When I look at the kinds of data you're gathering in each stage, right? When we're looking at SCORM, a lot of what we're looking at, there's more to it than that. But when you're at a SCORM environment, you're looking at course completions, right? Those early prototypes and pilots, I'll tell you, right? There's nothing like a good activity stream. Like, woohoo, I got data, look at that. I can click into it. I can see all the glorious details. But after that, you need to scale up. Noisy data here sounds like a bad thing. But noisy, think about noisy as all of the rich data around individual learning experiences. I talked to a vendor a couple weeks ago, and they talked about the fact that in their tool, they had analytics on the times in which an emoji, go ahead and give me some emojis, the times in which emojis were presented by learners in the flow of a facilitated session. And I thought, wow, that's a great example of noisy data. Super useful in a very narrow context. But when I put the heart emoji out onto a screen, probably doesn't have much to do with the length of time it takes for me to promote from one role to the next, right? And some of those larger metrics that we might be tracking. So as we get to full scale operation, we start getting more summary level data, actionable business data, and actionable design data, right? So interesting kind of thing. And none of these are straight lines, even though it looks like they kind of line up. I should have been a little bit less precise about lining up. Hey, early on in the cohort, most of you are dealing with free trial LRSs, which is exactly what you ought to be doing, right? I will recommend when you start rolling actual things out to actual learners, that's a really good signal to you that you ought to be paying for that LRS license, right? That is a good time. You want your data to be stable. I'm not saying the free trials aren't stable. What I'm saying is you want to keep that stuff, right? It's time to be paying for it. And then you'll be integrated more deeply in with other systems the further you go. Your early data may be disposable. May not follow as rigorously a profile, unless you're following CMI 5, as you will ultimately want to be. You're really early on, you're getting data and you're excited about it. You're getting data and you're saying, hey, look what I could do with this limited amount of data. Can you imagine what we could do with a full-on ecosystem, right? As you get moving, though, you're going to want to talk, and we're going to talk about governance, which sounds like no fun. But we're going to talk about governance and how, as you scale up, you'll need that. And as you can imagine, it gets more expensive the further you get to the right. So let's talk about some of those tools and processes, skills and mindset that are going to get you moving across as you go. And feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go. We'll have more links for you throughout this session or this part of the session, and then we'll hang out at a table afterwards. I might even be so bold as to ask Meg, who's on our learning engineering team and learning analytics, to join us at one of those tables. So let's take a look at the kinds of things that we have found helpful for moving across that journey, starting with your business case, right? And if your organization has a business case template, by all means, use their template, follow that momentum. If not, you may need to pull together a business case. And these are some of the things that we have seen as valuable in that business case space. There's a couple of things, and Watershed has a bunch of resources that will help you move along these ways too. But that business case is really important. That was something that we work with one of our clients for about, Matt, 2 months, working on their business case to help them build that coalition to move forward. So if your organization has a strong culture around that, that's helpful. The other thing that organizations typically want to hear about is who's using it. Is it official? Share with me some robustness, right? So it's not just coming from some, eager person in the training department with a bunch of letters that they want us to go spend money on, right? So I find that being able to refer to the Guild's State of xAPI Adoption. Oh, hey, Nadine or Mark, could you get the link to the learning analytics research that's open right now? So the Guild right now has a learning analytics research adoption study going on. We would love for you and this group to fill out that survey. That will also help provide business case information for all of us in the industry. I do have to say that being able to throw around the GitHub for the government's official definition of the specification is pretty helpful, because it feels a lot less fly by night, and the IEEE standardization is also going to go huge for us as far as business case. And with that, I recommend drawing out a map of your ecosystem. What do you currently have now? What is connected to what? What are the data flows? If your organization has something like this map, they have a template for that, go ahead and use it. If not, come up with one that works for you. Having a visual is super helpful for people to kind of like, aha, I got it, right? And it will help point out areas of your learning ecosystem that are siloed, and areas that you might already have advantage of where things might be connected. Right? The next tool is your data providers, right? So I want you to be thinking about what you're sending data with. In the early days of xAPI, I would hear from people, yeah, so I got a learning record store and I hooked up my e-learning and all I got was SCORM. No shade on SCORM. It's been important for us, right? But if your data provider isn't sending anything interesting, then you're not going to get anything interesting out of it, right? So a lot of data providers now, and when I say data providers, authoring platforms, learning platforms, right? And a lot of them provide some of them provide basic information in xAPI. Some of them provide really rich information using xAPI. In fact, we were so frustrated with how little information was provided by some of the e-learning tools that we built a tool for tools, right, to help get more data sent to learning record stores, right? Because it wasn't that their learning record store wasn't useful, it was that the data that was being sent to it wasn't super useful, right? So we're in that ecosystem spot, right? What's useful is the ecosystem map. What's useful is having data providers that actually send good data, right? And then the other is having a software requirements list for a learning record store or other platforms that you're going to use to manage this data. I think of this, right? So you go to an expo, it's like everything looks exciting. Everything looks beautiful. It's like going to the grocery store hungry, right? But when we work with clients to create an actual requirements list of why they want each requirement or what it might look like, how much do they want that requirement, right? Is it like a gotta have it, like no point in doing this without it, or it'd be kind of cool. That then helps them critically evaluate their options. And I have watched I have watched this decision process unfold several times, where being able to come back to that shopping list was really, really helpful for them. A number of our clients have also done what we call mini proof of concept projects, right? Where what they're looking at, in a as they first get started is like, what data am I going to get from here? How can I grab this particular piece of data? And so we have a matrix in which we just keep track. It's a simple list, right? What are we testing? How are we testing it? How will we know if the test passed? Right? What does success look like? Is this hard or easy? Who am I going to farm this out to? What's the status, right? And so that's super, super helpful. Sometimes your proofs of concept are simply to satisfy the curiosity of an executive who doesn't know what's easy or hard in an xAPI environment, right? And you go ahead and you do it, and it's like, hey, look, we did it. We got it. Let's move on to something more interesting. It's so funny that Eric Kuhn is here today, because Eric is the one who helped me realize several years ago, you may not remember this, friend. We were talking about xAPI implementation for an organization he used to work for. And he and I were like in there, and we were with it, and we were charging ahead. We're moving. And then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, so we have to train the L&D team to use this and to think about data, to think this way. And I'm thinking, everybody doesn't think this way. And so that was such a crystallizing moment for me. So thank you. I don't think you've heard that story until just now. And so cohort is absolutely a great place to get started. Cohort might be daunting for some people, right? So we've actually built a more a deeper and more supported environment for some of our clients, and that's part of why I wrote the book Data and Analytics for Instructional Designers. It's not a book about xAPI, but xAPI is really helpful in data and analytics for instructional designers. So bring your peers along with you, because if you're in this room, it's entirely possible you are ahead of your peers in your organization. Take a deep breath and realize that this is iterative. Literally just this week, we are releasing a project. We're working with a client, and we've got, I don't know, something like 24, right, units all wired up with xAPI. And as we're seeing the data, we're not releasing it, but as we're seeing the data come through, we realize, oh yeah, there's one more thing we wanted to do in order to be able to report precisely on exactly the way this particular environment wants to do. So we're going to have to open 24 pieces back up, or make some strategic changes in how we display that data, right? It's iterative. It's going, there's lots and lots of ways in which you're going to send data, you will see data, and you'll say, what I really want is this, right? So take that iterative mindset. And again, if you're here, you're probably ahead of your team. Help your team embrace the fact that in this space, it's not set it and forget it, right? If I build a SCORM package for somebody, literally I hit the publish button, it makes a zip file, I send that to them, load it up in the LMS, and I walk away to my next project, right? And with xAPI, because there's so much more rich data that you're working with, you want to be testing that way, way earlier, and perhaps involved a little bit after the zip and release there, right? Okay, I mentioned governance. Right? I mentioned governance. You'll need a governance plan. Governance is basically, how do we move out of the wild, wild west world of data into an organized space for keeping track of what we're doing, who is able to send data, to whom, who's receiving it, how are we structuring that data and talking about it so it's useful, right? And that could be an entire presentation all in and of itself. And I believe there are presentations in other cohorts about that. But one of the things that, as we get into an implementation perspective, right, is managing your data profiles and how you're going to be talking about data within your organization and across your team. And when Matt and I were talking about this, he said it's kind of like, right, your Tupperware. You've got lids and bottoms that all don't don't necessarily go together, right? And so thanks to Giphy for having exactly the right one, right? She's all excited, she's ready, she knows what she wants, she opens up the door, she gets hit with a flood of dozens and dozens of possibilities for her, all of which will hold something and put a lid on it. And at the end of the day, all she really wants are the handful of organized ones that end up on the counter. And so how do we move from an environment in which you've got all sorts of possibilities for how could I send our data, right? To I know the handful of things we're actually going to do with a particular learning experience. And this is how I communicate it to our team. So this gets us to the xAPI Concepts viewer. And Matt, xAPI Concepts is a new idea for many people. So can you walk quickly through what concepts are and how they fit into the bigger scheme of things?
Yeah, and so concepts are and I'm getting the term from the profiles and the profile specification for xAPI. And concepts, as you can see here, are the building blocks of how you build a statement. So verbs, activity types, extensions, there's some other things, attachment usage types, things like that are just components that are part of a statement. So if you're familiar with profiles, we've had some other sessions that talked about profiles. But you assembled them from concepts, and then you have a statement, and there's some patterns and things like that that are part of profiles.
So I'm going to stop sharing and let Matt share the concepts viewer.
Yeah. So what I'm going to talk about is a little more of the tactical and practical side of things, because that's kind of where I work. But it relates to what Megan was talking about in your maturity stages. You'll find yourself, even at prototype stage all the way up, you're going to find yourself needing to find these concepts like, I need a verb for commented. Where do I find that? I'm sure it's out there. What is it? There might be multiple definitions for different verbs, like which one's the right one that I should use. And so there used to be a vocab server that actually had a lot of these concepts in it. And then that kind of migrated to this newer profile server that if you've spent any time here, you can go through and look at these published profiles. And this is where the CMI5 profile that we were talking about earlier lives. And a bunch of other profiles that anyone can join this and create your own profiles and publish them. I would recommend working on them and getting them kind of to a good stage, but you can have working groups that you get people together and you put together a profile. So some of these are less established than others. Some of them are getting started. Some of them are very well fleshed out, several versions in. So in terms of the concepts, each of these profiles has, so let's say this ADO vocabulary is actually full of a lot of concepts. For each profile in the server, you can see a tab here that says concepts, and then it lists what's part of that. So all your answered, these, this ADO vocabulary is that sort of core list that you'll probably find a lot. So you can see the types here, like this concept type is verb. Here's some activity types. So for each of these profiles in here, they each have their own set, and they can pull concepts from each other. So, if this flashcards had something that was part of the ADO vocabulary, you can pull in that concept from that other place. So you don't have to, invent a new concept. So all that background is basically to say, sometimes this can be a little bit difficult to find the exact concept you want. So you can go up here to the browse all concepts, and then you can go to the concepts tab, and you can see this list, and it's paginated. You can go through. One thing you can do is, let's say I want to search by activity type. I can put that in, do a search, and now it's limited to all the activity types. But one downside of this is that I can search. Let's say I was looking for commented. Well, it's not an activity type. So for something like that, if I know what I'm looking for, I can filter it down to that. But if I kind of want to scan through, maybe I don't know what exactly I'm looking for. Maybe the verb I wanted isn't in there. Clicked is a verb that comes up a lot of times. Focused, maybe you want that, but maybe there's a better verb in there that you want. So, we have this profile flattener that Megan mentioned earlier. It's basically the data is coming from that profile server through the API. You can go through and kind of scan through each profile, but you have to do it profile by profile. There's no global way to kind of find those items. And when you're designing and developing, no matter if you're in that prototype stage or all the way up to the full scale, you're going to need to kind of pick and choose your concepts, because that's how you build your statements. And one way we often do it to start out with is with an Excel sheet that basically has all the items that we're going to use, all the concepts. So this is an example. This actually came from a real project. I just changed the company name, but you just start putting in what are we going to need. Like I needed a filtered verb. I looked for one. There isn't a filtered verb. Actually, there's organized. So I found one that's part of the TLA profile that is kind of similar to what I want. But I'm just kind of documenting this as I go along, because I'm going to need it because I was writing this from scratch in code. So I kind of needed to know what are the IDs here. So this helps to document initially, helps to design, but then it helps to implement when I go to actually code it. And then it helps in the analytics when you're at the end and you need to know what kind of things am I looking for in my data. And there's more concepts down here. There's some custom extensions that I made up because they didn't exist. And this is basically almost like a basic profile starter. It's not an official profile, but it has all the templates and patterns in here. So it's just a good way of documenting how you're going to structure everything. And this could eventually become a real profile, although it's very specific to this use case. But and shout out to the ChatGPT team and Doug Hahn. I didn't give them a heads up that I was going to look at this, but they have a very similar thing in their GitHub project for their chat souffle. They have a document in there where they're doing a very similar thing, and they even have notes in there. What kind of things are in those? What's the trigger to for all this? But still finding these can sometimes be a little bit difficult without just an easy way to go to look for it. So Megan mentioned our xAPI tool that we built a few years ago. So it basically helps you to write custom code for Storyline and Captivate without having to actually write it all yourself. And so if you've ever used this tool, internally, when you create one of the xAPI statements, there's a drop down for a lot of things like verbs and activity types that came from the same source that this original profile server came from. So if you're using xAPI, you can kind of use that drop down. But as you're developing and designing, it can be a little bit difficult. So we created this concepts viewer. And so right now it's the first xAPI tool that we've kind of set out there. Kind of the plan is to kind of extend what you can do with xAPI, but also just to help with xAPI in general. So the data source for this concepts viewer is this profile server. It's just using the API, but it's pulling in all of these concepts just by themselves, not the profiles themselves although you do have links to where the profile came from, or where the concept came from and which profile it belongs to. But basically it has all of the concepts that are in the profile server just all in one place. And then just an easy way to filter and search and find what you needed. So, like earlier I was looking for filtered. Like I said, it's not there. There's an organized, so you can just kind of filter. So this is the one I ended up with in my other example, accurate filtered content. So you can do a global search if you didn't find what you were looking for, and that will filter along the text of all of these columns, any field here. So this can help when you're designing, like even if you're working with an Excel sheet or something else or whatever you're using to kind of document these things, and maybe you just want to know, what else is in there. Like I want to find shared. There's several different types of shared, but you can find the one you want and then copy that out, put it in your document. But one thing you can also do is add a custom list. So then you can start to kind of construct your own sort of set of concepts. So, if I wanted shared, so I wanted this one, and then I'll just add a couple other ones here. Then I can add it to my list, and you can see it has check marks here, and you can kind of filter then, okay, here's my list, and start to construct this set of concepts. And this can be kind of a starting point for something like this, where you start to add more information. You have your other notes and things like that, because you can export this as a CSV. So this will export whatever view you're looking at, whatever data you have filtered. So you can just export that out, and it will basically have all of this information in there. And you could rename this to whatever you need to rename it, and you can have multiples. You can kind of manage these custom lists, delete whatever you need to do there. If you start to get a really long list, you can kind of expand that out. So this is all being stored in your browser. So right now there's no way to log in and keep these, but it will save locally to your machine. So you can kind of keep multiple lists in here and kind of have different versions there. But we found that this, already is kind of helping me a lot to, before I would have to kind of go through, kind of search, maybe go through a few pages, find it, copy and paste it. But I found this is really convenient to be able to search and filter. And each of these has, so this is also a triple state checkbox. So right now it's everything that I have selected. Here's everything I don't have selected. And then it just goes back to everything. But you can also, like in the case of shared earlier, you can, like this has unshared, but what if I just want to know I just want it shared. I don't want, the other search. So you can kind of narrow that down a little bit. You can clear all filters. There's a few other tools and things in there. So feel free to try this out and let us know if it's helpful, if there's anything else that can be added to it. I have some thoughts on some things that might be convenient to have here, like a few presets for what do the common authoring tools come out of the box? Like, what do they use? And so then just having maybe a list here of just, here's everything Storyline sends. Here's a list of all those things. Or you can also, if you want to filter this down to, say, activity type, whatever. Each of these also, if you click on it, it will just kind of auto filter to that item. But yeah, let us know. At some point, I may have some sort of feedback, a widget on here that will let you kind of submit some feedback. But just shout out in the Slack channels and let us know what you think.
Awesome.
Awesome. That is really very cool. And you're getting a lot of response to that in the chat as well. So, hey, thank you both. This has been a great presentation, and we roll on with the party. Megan and Matt, you're invited to find a seat at the table in the lounge. And if people have further questions, you can engage with them there. So for now, I'm going to give everybody that stretch break for 10 more minutes, and we'll see you back for the next session. So that means Leah, Renee, Michelle, Christina, and Becky Team Rise, you're on deck. We'll see you soon, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.